Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling refreshed this morning and ready for some more thought-provoking presentations. My name is Conul, and I'm just going to introduce one of our platinum sponsors, Natasha Corpus, who's going to speak to us for a few moments.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here bright and early for the first session. Thank you, Corona. My name is Natasha, and I'm the Regional Sales Manager for AM. And today, with the conference theme of supporting research through digital tools in mind, I'm briefly going to speak to how AM is supporting libraries to provide scalable digital archival access, drive digital humanities work, and to really enable the exploration of new research questions through access to digital primary source collections. But for those of you who may be less familiar with us, AM, or Adam Matthew, as you may know us by, is a digital publisher and platform provider specialising in primary source collections to support teaching and research across the humanities and social sciences. For over 3 decades, we've been a trusted partner for libraries and archives, combining a deep expertise in digital primary source publishing with the technology to enable discovery, access and engagement with sources from institutions globally. We're part of the SAGE group, and we've published over 140 different thematic collections that span disciplines such as literature, politics, and sociology, and we harness the latest technologies to really support scholarship across a range of interdisciplinary fields. From our conversations with our library partners across Ireland, there are a few consistent challenges coming through that frame what I'd like to talk about today, and I won't go into detail just for brevity, but they are important in many of our conversations. For example, the growing need for more curriculum-aligned content that journals alone don't always meet the needs of. At the same time, we recognise that budgets are often weighted towards STEM, which leaves less flexibility elsewhere. And with an increasing scrutiny on spend, every resource now really needs to demonstrate long-term value. But alongside these challenges, there's an important shift happening, particularly in the expansion of digital humanities, which we know is one of the fastest growing areas of higher education, from undergraduate degrees to established master's programs. And we've seen major UK-Ireland research funding for DH over the past few years. And what these collective challenges and shifts are really creating is direct demand for archival and primary source material that are meeting these evolving needs, supporting DH initiatives, and offering lasting value. And these are exactly the gaps that digital primary source collections have been designed to fill. Digital archives today really give researchers hands-on access to original sources alongside powerful digital research tools. And what is particularly exciting is how these tools and technologies like handwritten text recognition, or HTR, are enabling entirely new research questions and driving DH projects, helping to uncover language use, patterns and connections that simply weren't as visible before. To hopefully bring this to life, I'm going to show you a very brief example of where these types of technologies can be harnessed in our Women's Voices and Life Writing collection, which is a truly incredible resource. It's very unique and kind of spans 3 centuries, telling the histories and experiences of women from across Britain and Ireland in their own words. It brings together diaries, correspondence, oral histories, and printed memoirs from leading archives such as the British Library and the National Libraries of Ireland and Scotland. And there's a real focus in this collection on underrepresented women. The collection foregrounds working class, LGBTQI+, and disabled women, and covers issues such as race, health, gender, education, class, and sexuality. One of the real highlights of this resource are the Rosamund Jacob diaries from the National Library of Ireland, which span 1897 to 1960. Rosamund was an incredible individual. She was an Irish political activist and novelist, and a key contributor to both the Irish suffrage and nationalist movements of the 20th century. The collection comprises Jacob's literary, personal, and political papers, which tell of her political involvements and her commitment to women's rights. And these are issues that run through much of her writing from her school days throughout her lifetime. There are vast swathes of material for students and researchers to explore, and it can take days, if not weeks, to read through these in the reading room. But with the inclusion of tools such as HTR, it's now easier than ever to search across this material to find specific terms or phrases and connect ideas across documents and time. For example, here we're looking at terms like militancy and women and law, which bring to the surface Rosamund's evolving opinions of and involvement with the suffrage question. More broadly, HTR within these collections creates exciting opportunities to meet the expanding needs in digital humanities work, forming the basis of projects like corpus mapping and large-scale textual analysis, and opening up vital sources to libraries and academics that are championing this interdisciplinary research. So thank you for your time today. 5 minutes really is not very long. This is a very brief introduction, hopefully to how AM's collections and digital technologies can support that digital research and teaching in an interdisciplinary way. But I'd really love to learn more about your own collection development priorities and your DH requirements. So if you haven't had time to stop by the stand, please do. Or alternatively, you can scan the QR code on the screen to schedule an in-depth follow-up with my colleague Matthew, who is your regional sales executive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. So I just once again urge you all to try and spend some time in our sponsors exhibition, and please don't forget also the sponsors quiz, which needs to be completed by noon today when we make the draw, and you have to be present at the closing session to get the prize. So I'll now hand over to the chair of our next session, Ciara McCaffrey, who will commence presentations for day 2.
Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, John Cox. John will be very well known to most of you in the room and in the Irish Library community. John retired as University Librarian at the University of Galway in November 2023, after 15 years in that role and 30 years in senior leadership positions. He has an extraordinary depth of experience, and he's always been exceptionally generous in sharing that experience through his writing, his many presentations here at Conul and elsewhere, and his engagement with the community. He's been a wonderful role model for many of us and a great mentor for me over many years. Many of you will already be familiar with John's earlier work, including his 2-part SWOT analysis of academic libraries and his case study on the evolution and politics of a library building project. And retirement has certainly not slowed him down. In recent months, he published an article in the Journal of Academic Librarianship titled Politics and the Positioning of Academic Libraries, and just last week, another piece on the Times Higher Education website exploring how we articulate a clear identity for university libraries and why it matters. His book, The Strategic Positioning of Academic Libraries, Global Challenges, Local Politics and Strategy Development, was officially launched on the 11th of March this year at the University of Galway, hosted by Monica and the library team. It was a lovely event. I was delighted to be able to make it, and it had many, many colleagues from across the University of Galway and John's family and friends, and some lovely speeches by all. But John has written this book for us, a gift to this community, the people in this room and in our home libraries. It's a call to action, so we are absolutely delighted to have a special Conul launch this morning and to have John as a keynote. So before I hand over to John, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to say a few words about his book from a reader's perspective. I had the privilege of reading an advance copy, and I gave it a wholehearted and enthusiastic endorsement. I've been library director at the University of Limerick for 3 years now, and the longer I'm in the role, the more I realise just how critical the question of positioning is for libraries within our institutions. When I took up the role, I was struck and a bit dismayed, to be honest, by how deeply embedded the perception was among senior university management that the library is basically a student building full of books. Not a particular problem, well managed, but not critical to university strategy and current priorities. Challenging and changing those perceptions has become a central priority for me, because without that shift, it is impossible to ensure that the library is positioned appropriately when strategic decisions are made and resources are allocated. One phrase that John uses throughout the book really stayed with me: benign neglect. It's a powerful and uncomfortable idea. Everyone loves the library, but not everyone truly understands the breadth and depth of our contribution. particularly when it comes to institutional strategy. And while there might be general goodwill towards the library, translating that into resourcing and inclusion in decision-making can be a huge challenge for many of the reasons that John outlines. Libraries are at a crossroads, and in truth, we've been at this crossroads since the beginning of the digital era. But the pace of change is accelerating dramatically. And I do ask myself, in the grand scheme of things, taking a step back, will libraries advance or decline in this era? John teases this out in his book. Whether libraries advance or decline depends on how we are valued, understood, and crucially, how we are resourced. All of that comes down to how we are positioned in our institutions. And that comes down to all of us. It's a huge responsibility for us. Reading John's book was a real moment of clarity for me. It affirmed all of the concerns that I had been aware of but hadn't quite gotten to the heart of understanding. And more importantly, it provides a roadmap, practical, thoughtful, and grounded in experience, on how to position our libraries more effectively. In my endorsement, I described it as a fantastic, compelling, and unflinching examination of academic libraries, one that is in equal parts terrifying and optimistic. It speaks directly to the most critical and complex challenge that I face as a library director. It's a book that makes you think and act. At one point, I found myself writing in the margin, "Position or perish." And that, in many ways, captures the heart of John's argument. This is a powerful wake-up call. His assessment of the risks of benign neglect is both alarming and, I think, deeply accurate. The choice he presents to us is stark: position strategically or face decline. I cannot recommend this book enough. It's essential reading, not just for library leaders, but for all library staff who want to understand the environment we're operating in, why things are changing the way they are, and their role in this change and in the broader positioning. So that's enough from me. I'm delighted now to hand over to John, who will explore the critical question at the heart of his work: will the future of academic research libraries be better? John.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. And a huge thanks to Ciara for that very generous introduction, and also to the organising committee for inviting me to present a keynote. This is a real honour and highlight for me. I used to always put the Conul conference top of the bill as far as I was concerned when I was in the workforce, both in terms of the quality of the content, but also the quality of the company. It is wonderful to be back among the Conul community briefly this week, so thank you very much for having me. And thanks for the opportunity to take on a fairly tough topic on a Thursday morning, but we'll give it the best effort we can. Will the future of academic and research libraries be better? I thought I'd just mention briefly just my own kind of thinking in writing this book, what I was trying to do. I suppose I was trying to improve my own understanding and kind of get an in-depth understanding of where academic libraries are situated in their parent institutions today, what are the factors driving all of that, and what might that do to inform future strategy. So I wanted to look at the library not just in its campus environment, but also in the wider context of higher education and indeed the world at large, where so many strange things are happening. But also the internal world of academic libraries, our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and indeed our history, which tells us some useful messages as well. And I never expected this to be nice and neat and simple, and it wasn't. I wasn't disappointed in that. It's a fairly complex, nuanced, contradictory picture in many ways. A really interesting cocktail of positives and negatives, challenges and opportunities, pluses and minuses. And I think that very complexity is what was driving my core contention, I suppose, for the book, but particularly for this presentation as well. If we want to consider, whether or not the future is going to be better or how we might actually make it better, we can only do so, I think, from a position of fully appreciating where we're at now and how we got there. And with that in mind, just the outline of the presentation, I'm going to start with a little history lesson, going back in time, then straight up to the present day and look at some of those external influences we talked about in the world at large in higher education. Then try something I found very challenging in the book, to sum up a kind of average position of academic libraries today with all the factors shaping them, recognizing that every library is different, of course, but there are perhaps some commonalities that we can see in terms of the position that we hold. And of course, later on, I want to move to the future, and that's, of course, in the title of the presentations we need to talk about. Are there some certainties and uncertainties we can hang our hats on as we look into the future, try and identify those? And then this is where I want to really talk about strategic positioning as a pretty important, not only concept, but activity amid massive uncertainty. And I think I want to talk about what it is and why it's important. And lastly, more valuably, I hope, is to talk about the practical steps we can take in terms of positioning for a better future. So I'm going to begin with that little bit of history, going back in time to the 1980s. I started my career in 1981, so I've lived through all of this, so sometimes painfully, but these are things that happen. I should also say this is just a small slice chronologically of our history, because the academic library goes back to the middle of the 13th century. But I do think the seismic changes occurred really from the 1980s. More has happened in the last 40, 50 years and in terms of changing our status and situation than happened before. I said the big change was when we moved from being an exclusively print entity with a monopoly on access to scholarly information to digital information creeping up, and now this was being predominant. But in the old days, you had to come to the library to get access to the latest journals and books, so we were the only game in town. That's not the case now. Of course, users have gradually become much more self-sufficient, able to do a lot of the things that they used to depend on the library for, and that continues to evolve. And of course, libraries responded by diversifying our value proposition. We kind of couldn't rely only on books as our identity or collections as our identity. We diversified very productively, I think, into all kinds of areas of teaching, learning and research, student employability, data management, all kinds of things. And our buildings have changed out of all knowing to become a kind of social entity and to promote social learning. So all good and valuable things to have done, but what it means is the value of the library is a bit harder to measure than when we were, in a very simple way, collections and the buildings that housed them. That was very literally a solid value proposition. The value proposition is a bit more scattered and diverse and harder to sum up, perhaps. Also, economically, we've had our challenges. Our spending capacity has gone down, and one of the reasons is we've got more competitors operating in similar spaces on campus to what we're doing, and also a lot of newbies on campus, new units that didn't exist in the 80s, all looking for a slice of the cake. And I'm not going to show many graphs. This might be the only one. I hope it's legible, but don't worry how legible it is. The message from this one is, this is the share of university expenditure that academic libraries accounted for, or at least 40 US academic libraries, tracking this from 1982 to 2011. And what you're seeing is a downward curve. And what's happened is the share we account for of university expenditure in that period has halved. It's gone down from 3.7% to 1.8%. And I suppose in blunt terms, that kind of means others are getting more, we're getting less. And there are plenty of others looking for that money, as we know as well, some of those newer entities. Also, we're further from the centre of power. The rector reported commonly into the president or the head of the institution, or as a member of the university leadership team in the 80s. Less so now, a lot less so, in fact. It's quite rare in many ways. And I suppose that kind of has given us less influence than we had, but also less independence. We existed as a kind of separate entity in many ways. Now we're lumped in organizationally with other organizations, other units on campus to report into the university management team. And maybe a bit of a loss of prestige, partly for some of the factors you see up there, but if you were around in the 80s, academic staff were commonly in the library. They're hardly ever in there now. And that's kind of just a little image maybe just to take in terms of the prestige issue. But I do think it's very important to balance this up. The value proposition, the fact of its greater versatility is a huge advantage for us. You don't want to be depending on collections only or any one thing only for your value. We are, of course, influential in so many areas of the university's activity now that that's a very good thing. We are connected, of course, across the university to so many people. That's also very helpful. And of course, we're a social entity as well through our buildings. So, a mixed picture as we look back on history, but it's some good and some bad, I suppose. Now I want to move up to the present day and look at some of those external influences in the outside world. And I was delighted to see in the College of Surgeons' recent job description for University Librarian Director of Library Services that they actually are expecting a successful candidate to indeed have a very full understanding of the outside world, be it the educational world or the political world or the economic trends. And they want that person to position the university library effectively within that context. So great to see that, as somebody's just published a book talking about it. Let's think, what are those external influences? Well, go to look at influences in the outside world first. And this table, things down, just want to show about 4 factors down the left, put some flesh on those. These are in the headlines pretty much every day. But the political side of it, polarization, extremism, tensions between superpowers, these are all kind of having some fairly serious symptoms in terms of democracy being under threat, authoritarian and populist regimes thriving in some parts of the world, wars in parts of the world that there weren't even about 4 or 5 years ago, cultural wars, kind of battles about identity and people being more certain of what they're against than what they're for, perhaps, rampant disinformation and fake news. So what does that mean for us in the academic library? I think Dagny pointed this out very well yesterday. Well, the truth, we stand for the truth, but that's been contradicted. And our values are on the line as well. I'll talk more about our values, but it is up to us to defend them and take part in defending them against all those mistruths and such like. On the economic front, instability, I suppose, the order of the day. Again, some words in the headlines, all linked to each other, tariffs fueling inflation, and huge debt. I mean, I suppose there's massive levels of exposure in terms of government debt, thanks to massive borrowing, I suppose, during COVID and the 2008 economic downturn. Our governments and ourselves were not in a great position to withstand a global economic crash, for which there is plenty of potential, even though it's kind of not evident at the moment, but I've heard lots of talk of a crash. And if that happens, bad news for us. We are in a fairly tight financial corner as it is. The last thing we need is another crash, and 2008 was no fun at all. Climate change, I'm no expert in that, but obviously the symptoms, well-known, global warming, and in more recent times, extreme weather events. And what it kind of means is, if you're in the eye of the storm, literally amid those extreme weather events, it's existential, or at least very damaging for some libraries. And one way or another, sustainability, a big priority for us all. Sustainability or action against climate change seems to be on hold at the moment. Governments almost just not doing very much. But I think the day is going to come where there'll be panic and a massive need to invest more, and that's going to cost plenty when that day comes. Technological advance, well, AI mentioned plenty of times at this conference and everywhere we look, and it's clearly spreading its influence, for good or ill, depending on your perspective or your sector or whatever, but certainly out there and very important. Since COVID, maybe a preference for digital interaction rather than people talking to each other, and also that vulnerability to a few tech companies being in charge. Just think of the Canvas learning management system, which I think was cyber attacked 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think Ireland got off reasonably lightly, if I understand it, but Australia and the US were kind of decimated for a while. So that's a vulnerability. And just thinking again from the library perspective, well, we feel, of course, the dilemmas around AI could be very good for us, could take away some grunt work, but we could see a lot of job losses. It could introduce all kinds of service opportunities and productivity and all kinds of good things, but we have concerns about the ethics of AI, the way data are used. So ups and downs there. Have to plan, I suppose. We're seeing it for less in-person engagement as we go on. That has been evident since COVID. And then we also have the IT vulnerability to a relatively small number of companies as well. And I apologize for putting up such a horrible looking and slide and horrible content at this hour of a Thursday morning, but this is a fairly chilling prediction. It was made in the book on the right-hand side of the slide in 2023. It was kind of estimated a 41% chance that any of those global catastrophes could occur. And I'm not going to call them out. You can take your pick as to which one is the worst. For me, it's AI attempting to destroy the human race. Pretty drastic, I have to say. okay? But in many ways, these are simply the outworkings of what was on the previous slide. These are vulnerabilities, and they're all out there. Thankfully, none of them has fully happened as yet, but some of them have partially happened, or they're kind of considered to be live threats, and quite a worry for us. And in all honesty, if anything like this happened, it's kind of disastrous, really. It would upend all our future plans. So we have to hope these things won't happen, but I think we have to be aware that they could, and that would subvert everything in its way, in the way that this was the COVID pandemic did in 2020. Don't know if this is any more optimistic, probably not. The other side of the external influences I want to look at, this time higher education. So similar format, look at the symptoms and consequences here. The first one, obvious and well-known, funding shortages. And I suppose there's now a huge focus on student numbers as the main form of income for universities. And we need to keep the numbers up, and we need in particular to attract international students. I suppose they pay higher fees. But I don't know if we can depend on that forever. Higher education systems are improving around the world. Students may not need to travel as much. And also there's the other one, a big issue of potentially graduate market saturation. Will there be jobs for everybody that graduates if we keep up the same numbers that we have, and especially with AI making a threat there? So there's the potential for a big drop in student numbers, which I think would be a serious one. And as it is, we really do feel the impact of funding shortages. There's a huge, the cost base has increased for universities, but it's created a huge strain. Cost of regulatory compliance, the cost of extra student services, the cost of additional IT support for online learning and such like. And that strain of increased costs, but maybe not increased income, has led to closures or the withdrawal of academic programs, job losses, 30,000 in UK higher education alone in the last 3 years. I was quite shocked to see the figure as high as that. Huge constraints and pressures from without on universities, governments holding universities very much to account. The funding is all conditional, performance-based. Regulation, things like audit and procurement that take up a lot of time and resource. So those are pressures from without. And also the student body, I suppose, creating a pressure by being very consumerist in its outlook. As far as they're concerned, they're paying fees and they want very good value and they want good jobs at the end of it. And as a result, you get intense competition in institutions. Global rankings been a huge thing, trying to attract the best students. And it's kind of dog-eat-dog to some extent between institutions and even within them on campus as well, as I'll talk about shortly. The authority and trust of higher education under siege to some extent. I haven't mentioned Donald Trump till now, but got this far. But if you just look at what the Trump administration is doing to higher education, a sustained attack, actually outright hostility, the withholding of funding, the challenging and the suppression of diversity, equity and inclusion programs, or their presence in courses and such like, huge levels of intervention and interference. But also that feeds, and again, not so much in Ireland perhaps, but could come our way, public hostility as well, a real questioning of what higher education is for, are these degrees valuable, why are we paying so much, etc. A lot of questions being asked, and a lot of scrutiny. And one thing that brings about is a dismissal of expertise. So it's partly to do with the kind of populism and the preference for simple truths. The more complex world that academics put forward is often dismissed. And that is a huge worry. But maybe we haven't helped ourselves, universities, instances of research fraud or inequality of access to higher education or of promotions within higher education. Those kind of things, I suppose they in turn breed a loss of confidence from without, but also from within. I think there's a kind of a sense that maybe we don't feel as sure of our own ground either. And lastly, in this slide, as on the previous one, technology has been very important. This is dictating the pace in many ways. Online learning now very much mainstream since COVID. And the good thing about that is certainly opened up new markets. We can offer much more flexible programs, but as I mentioned earlier, brings new costs as well. And of course, the disruption of AI, very much in higher education. Will it be good AI or bad AI? Who can tell? Will academic integrity be completely subverted, or will there be kind of new opportunities in teaching and research? Which will win out, I suppose, the question. one thing for sure, universities seem to me to be playing catch-up since November 2022, when ChatGPT and generative AI became mainstreamed. You see policies been drafted, but the world of AI has moved on by the time they're published. And one of the things we've seen is a kind of an outsourcing of thinking to ChatGPT, etc., and deep reading very much in decline. And I don't think the slide is great, but don't worry, you don't need to read it. It's a discussion, it's reported in the Times Higher Education last month, discussion at the London Book Fair, where somebody was saying that previously students would read 3 books in a week. Now you're lucky if to read 1 book in 3 weeks. And that is, we can see that around us. That's ominous for higher education and indeed for ourselves in libraries. So I wonder, how does this all translate into life on campus? And I think everything rotates around uncertainty. You've that sense of competition, not only between institutions, but within them, everyone's striving to get what they can of the small pot. You've pressure on students, translated into mental health issues, pressure on everybody, academic and other staff, through all that compliance and just the size of the student body. You've disgruntlement, especially from academics, with all the, again, the accountability, the metrics, the managerialism, as they would see it, at the centre of the campus. But I suppose not just academics, but they in particular are vociferous about it. Everything's got very political. If you want to get something done, you have to pull the right political strings and know what they are and where they are. Also, these two factors pretty much linked. In times of huge uncertainty, you will naturally enough get short-term thinking, very hard to develop a long-term strategy and stick to it, and priorities just liable to shift as governments change and policies change from without as well. And certainly in my own time, I always found it was hard enough to get things done on campus, that you have a lot of bureaucracy, but that's only got slower now with all these other factors creating such uncertainty. Attention even harder to get as well. So if you're trying to convey messages about the library, it can be difficult, because I think some people are kind of in that siege mentality. They're in survival mode, not listening too much. However, I do think it's really important, again, it is far from all gloom and doom. All of these things are true. Record levels of student participation and demand for higher education, and that is so healthy in its own right. All the other good things mentioned there, the value of research discoveries, the massive contribution in academic libraries, that higher education institutions make, say, in a town like Galway especially, in terms of society and the economy. The public engagement of academics, despite what the populists say, is actually much valued too. And you'll always get energy. Just go on any campus and you'll feel the energy. And I love this quote here. I think it describes it pretty well. And this is all still true. That university actually the most hopeful community has ever existed, filled with young people who are looking to the future and clever souls who are opening up new scientific horizons. And what's also mentioned is that's been going on for 800 years. So there's no reason to think higher education won't continue to be very important and to prosper, but clearly amid many challenges as well. And I think if one wanted to sum up the operating environment for academic libraries, I think the acronym VUCA is quite applicable. It's used in military and managerial circles. And as it says here, it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it really means that there's no comfort zone out there. If you're trying to make decisions, you're in a very unstable climate. You won't have all the information you'd like to have to hand to make those decisions. And even if you had, things will probably change fairly soon after you've made them. So it is a difficult positioning environment, there's no doubt about that. So I want to move now, having considered maybe what history has, how history has shaped us, as well as current day external influences. What is the average position of academic libraries today? And I'm at pains to say that, of course, every library is different, and some of the things on the slide here won't apply to your library, but I do think a fair number of them will at least have some kind of make some sense, I hope. And what I'm going to do here is just try and weigh up the position with good news and bad news. Begin with the good news, the advantages. And the first thing I put down here is this long-time scholarly association that we have. We've been around for 800 years. That really counts for something. We are an expected and established entity on campus, unlike some of those newer entities. And also, we are very much associated with scholarship. We're on the same page as academic staff. We're a good news story to them. We are wanting to help them with their scholarship. We're not auditing them or checking their quality or God knows what else. So I think that's a good thing to be able to say. We're also, thanks to the diversified value proposition, very well connected on campus. We're at the centre of many social networks. We operate across teaching, learning and research. And I guess we just connect into a lot of things, and we are multidisciplinary so that we also connect others who might not otherwise connect with each other. Some of that is down to our physical centrality, a huge natural advantage. I guess we were there at the start, so we got the middle of the campus, and others would kill for that. A great location gives us that great role in terms of community and that sense of belonging that universities are always saying they want to cultivate. We are pretty vital to that with where we are and the number of people from different disciplines who come together and congregate in libraries. And also, it's a great vantage point. We're able to see a lot of what's going on. We can kind of sense changes in teaching and learning, etc., just by being in the middle of the campus and having these people in our building. Also, we have a collaborative instinct which has served us well over the years. That's a huge advantage. In a cynical way, you could say the safety in numbers, but actually that ability to work with others has enabled us and others to get a lot of things done that couldn't have been done singly by any department on its own. And also, we have collaborated very well with each other in consortia, so IRL, the shining example in Ireland, of course. The trusted status of academic libraries is a massive advantage because universities themselves, as I mentioned before, have kind of lost some of that trust that they had. We have kept it, and I think a lot of that is down to the values that we have, the support for intellectual freedom, free quality of access to information, collaboration, service, lots of good things that we do and we stand up for, and that people would definitely get behind and support. We are kind of the good guys on campus in many ways, standing up for the right things. And I think that means we are trusted, and that's a good basis for going forward, working with others and bringing forward our own agenda. And lastly, there's so many opportunities for advancement still. So all the good things we have done, as in open scholarship would be one example, but think of the opportunities, AI literacy, things we can do around research integrity and standing up for the truth, for example, and our social centrality as well. Lots of good things we can do. So that was all the good news. And to talk about the not so good, needed laughs before we get into this. Righto, the bad news as such. Well, the first one here, I put it down as conservatism, and there is nothing wrong with conservatism itself. It's just that some of the things that it leads to, I think we can be just a little bit hesitant towards change, maybe a little bit cautious at times, and it's in our instinct. And of course, conservatism rightly involves preservation as a vital function, but as I say, it can just breed that bit of caution and hesitancy towards opportunity, and that can be a problem. And also, it can breed a bit of inward focus. We can be inclined maybe more to look at our own, internally at our own processes, to give a lot of time to that, and maybe that can take away from time supporting the agenda and priorities of the university. And that in itself can feed into perhaps the most dangerous of these disadvantages, and Ciara mentioned it earlier, stakeholder misperceptions. That people made, I've seen this in the literature quite a few times, a kind of perception from above that libraries, they're great, but they're not doing as much as they could for the institution at large. And on top of that, there's just often a sense of, as Ciara said, that we're still thought of as being, books and buildings and nothing else, even though we do so much more. So we're seriously underestimated and also taken for granted. We seem to considered to be well managed and not a problem. And all of those things, they're dangerous. And I will talk about the importance of stakeholder perceptions and misperceptions a little bit later on. Maybe linked in a bit, these things are all connected. So some confusion around the identity of the library. Are we still the old library, the books and buildings, or are we all these other new things? But those other new things, it's quite a long list, kind of hard to summarize all those other things we're doing. So it can all get a bit mixed up. And it's been called a brand crisis in places, which is kind of probably put in a bit strongly, but it can happen. And our buildings can even look a bit like other learning spaces on campus. So there's kind of factors here that can cause some confusion. And one of the other things is we co-deliver a lot of our value with other people these days, but we may not always be seen as the deliverers, and others, we may miss out, should we say, on some of the credit. It could go elsewhere. Economic decline, well, we've had pretty, at best, static budgets meeting a dysfunctional journals market over years. I suppose rising demand, still responsible for print, recurrent expenditure kind of accounting for most of the money we have, which makes it really hard then to find new money for new things. And I think a decline in our competitiveness. Think back to that 2% figure, instead of 4% of the university's expenditure, that others are definitely thriving, maybe getting more of the money than we did. And of course, there are many more units on campus these days, but the campus is a very competitive place. And that figure, I think, says we have lost a bit of ground from 4% to 2%. And of course, think of the competition from without, the Googles, the Amazons, all those other ones who have done over a period of time, taken some of our business away from us too. And last one called political struggles. Some of this, again, been down to the increased size of the university, but our absence from the top table is a fairly serious problem. And some of that, again, is fed into those perceptions, maybe, or misperceptions, that maybe people don't think we kind of need to be at the top table. So that is a worry. But I do think we also have to put our own hand up and say that in some cases, we've had a bit of a disdain for politics. We kind of consider it to be beneath libraries, not part of our value set. However, unfortunately, politics is how things get done. So one really has to engage more, I think, with the whole political setup and with developing the political skills needed to work through it. And thanks to Ciara, that's the article she mentioned a little bit earlier that I felt was something I could develop a bit more beyond what I'd done in the book, just looking at politics and the positioning of academic libraries, if that's of interest to people. And I think politics is the heart of Western Illinois University Library and the grim tale therein. I don't know how familiar this is to people, but that is a university that, not uncommonly, is struggling with student numbers and graduation and income, and it felt that it needed to cut 20% of its budget back in 2024. Where did it look? The library. It decided that it would remove 9 professional librarians from a staff of 15, leaving 6 behind, and it was a pretty chilling situation. Clearly some thinking took hold at the upper echelons. A luxury that we can't afford, were the words of the interim associate provost. And he said, oh yeah, I love libraries too, but these people are great, but they're not teaching something that people have to attend in order to graduate. And when that kind of thinking takes hold, it's really hard to know what happened, but it's really worrying. You kind of want to get in ahead of that. And what happened afterwards was big hue and cry, the library staff defended themselves, academics came out and said how valuable the library was. All too late, unfortunately. Those people lost their jobs in May 2025. I think that's a big warning to us all that if the wrong kind of thinking takes hold on top, that can be highly problematic. So think of that issue of perceptions and misperceptions, to which we will return. So we've had a good airing, I think, of the past and the present. Time to look at the future, as mentioned in the title of the paper. So I thought we'd just briefly take stock of, are there some certainties that we can take to the future, and indeed uncertainties? Just to identify a few of these, well, death and taxes definitely would be with us. We can safely say that one, but probably should add a few specific to our own sector. And again, probably nothing very surprising about these, but I think it's safe to say there is no big pot of money coming towards higher education or to us in libraries. Funding is going to stay tight, so we have got to make the best of what we have and make that work. The competition we face is only intensifying on campus and beyond. We're in a fight. We've got to try and win that fight. Also, the consumerism of students and others, no sign of that one changing either. So how can we meet those rising expectations? How can we get attention? That is, as mentioned already, difficult and only going to get harder to get the message of the library across. The penultimate one there, this is the safest bet of the lot. Whatever happens to higher education will dictate what happens to libraries. That's always been the way and will be the way. So let's hope it's a good story for higher education. And the library values, this one I think more positive than some of the others. Library values are a great anchor for us. They do connect our past, present and future. And that is something we can work with. The uncertainties, I thought for balance I'd go for 6 of these, but it could have been 16 easily enough. But these are things we've talked about already, so I don't need to say too much. But you have to think, where are these global tensions leading us? Will there be more wars? The wars that there are, what would be the humanitarian and economic and energy implications of those? These are all live issues. Economic stability is indeed uncertain, as we talked about. If a crash was to turn up, really bad news. Can academics, can they get back their authority and restore the confidence in scholarly information and what academics have to say in the face of populism, social media, and so forth? It's going to be a difficult one. Again, we must hope that goes well, but we can't say hand on heart that it will. Definitely uncertain as to the outcomes of AI, how it'll go. Will it be good or bad? I suppose that's a very glib way of putting it, but it's probably going to be a mix of both. And exactly how it plays out is highly uncertain as we speak. The viability of higher education, definitely on the line. That issue of graduate market saturation been one. And also even just to think, this is something that's already happened. There are over 1,000 less post-secondary institutions in the US in 2021 than there were in 2012. So institutions are closing already. And then lastly, the extent of uncertainty itself. Think back to that horrible slide we looked at earlier. The things that could happen, and we hope they won't, but if they did, they would change everything. So it seems to me that there would be no value in somebody like me coming up here and saying, well, for the future, you should definitely invest in this very specific area of activity or that one. I think it's probably more helpful to think about strategic positioning here as a good investment of time, and that maybe we should talk in terms of principles, maybe rather than specifics. So that's what I'm kind of hoping to do, and that term strategic positioning is in the title of the book. Also, our good friends at the College of Surgeons refer to the importance of positioning in their role description as well. So I think that kind of mandates a discussion of, well, what is positioning, why is it important, and how could we turn it to advantage? So a little bit about what positioning is, and what I've got here is, I should say, it's mainly a kind of management and marketing concept. So the literature is based in that field in particular. But one of the very first books, and it's the kind of Bible, the most influential book, back in 1981, a very interesting title that tells you a lot, Positioning, the Battle for Your Mind. And what positioning is about really is, or what it emphasizes, is shaping stakeholder perceptions. And I think, as we've seen, that's important for libraries. And it's really saying that how you're perceived is vital to your success. And in the library world, Rick Anderson makes a very interesting point. Perception matters more than actuality. That what actually is happening is one thing, but how people see it is actually really vital. And it could be that we could be thinking we're doing really well, but if others don't think that, that's a real problem. And strange enough, we do this in libraries, we agonize, we could be saying we're doing terribly, but if others actually think we're doing well and value us, that actually counts for more. And in my own book, I just thought to try and kind of encapsulate what's positioning about, or what are you trying to do when you're strategically positioning the library. It seems to me you're trying to situate the library compellingly, as in a way that makes a mark that stands out. You're trying to get into the head of the stakeholders with whatever it is you want to tell them, and you want them to feel at the end of it all that the library is vital to the institution and that we, as in stakeholders, want to help it to advance. And some of the components of positioning, I felt there was kind of 5 that emerged. First of all, being very clear about the library identity. What do we stand for, and what do we contribute that's different? We also need to be distinctive from the competition, so that's linked in a bit to that as well. Making the most of our existing strengths is important. You can't magic up new strengths in a day or a week or a month, but you can make the most of what you have. And also, if you want to position successfully, if you want to get inside people's heads, you've got to have a fair idea of what's already in those heads and what makes them tick. So understanding your audience as intimately as important, and communicating effectively to them, of course, even more important and quite challenging, as we've already noted, on a busy campus. So I think we should also take stock. Why is positioning important? The things that it influences: reputation, recognition, resourcing, and prospects. They're all on the line in terms of how people perceive you. And if positioning is done well, a very good news story, you'll be more competitive, you'll probably get more funding, greater influence with decision makers and everybody else. They'll recognize what you do, and you'll have a much more secure base for the present and indeed into the future. So I think it's pretty desirable to achieve that. Worth noting, I beg your pardon, that the opposite can happen if you're unsuccessful. So bad things can happen in all of those areas, and that really is bad news. So I suppose it seems to me, having looked at this a fair bit as well, that positioning is just too important to leave to chance. You've kind of got to actively engage with it. But it's a good investment. It's a secure investment at times of uncertainty. It can do you so much good. It's worth putting the time in. And also, I'd say it's a common sense thing. It's not a load of theory. There are practical actions that can be taken based around principles. You can use existing capacities. You're not looking for new funding. Make the most of what you have. Look at controlling the controllables. How do you use time? What messages do you want to get out there? There are things that can be controlled, and positioning benefits from that. And also a big point here, I think everybody is involved in positioning. It is not just about a great presentation by the director to the top committee in the campus. Actually, every daily interaction of service or whatever shapes the positioning of the library and how it's perceived. So we're all in that business together. So what I want to do now, just the last part of the presentation, is put forward 6 principles that would position us, I hope, for a better future. The bad news is I felt yet another table coming on, but this is the last one. I want to just kind of flesh this one out. I kind of got the 6 principles down the left, but let's just talk about them. The first one, position assertively. This one overarches all the others, I think. So important to be active about and proactive about position, to go out and claim the desired position you want for the library. If you don't, you get an unwanted one. People will fill the gap, and those misperceptions will take hold. So we don't want that to happen. We want to be assertive. And what's that look like? I think it looks like taking the lead, which is part of the theme of this conference, in areas mentioned like open scholarship, for example. Taking the lead, but also being confident of the strengths of the library, advertising them, being proactive, inserting ourselves in places rather than waiting to be asked. And also, claiming credit where it's due. So I think that this one does overarch the others, and it combats inward focus to an extent as well by getting us out there on the front foot. Analysing the environment, again, this is about looking outwards. There's so much to look out to, but we need to know what's shaping our world. And as we know, it's things on campus, in higher education, in the world at large, and so on and so forth. User behaviour among different constituencies. Keep monitoring those things, I think, is important. And in particular, the most important bit, I think, is to understand the institution. What are its politics? How do we get things done? And then what are its priorities? So important that the library is actively seen as contributing to priorities for the institutions. And loads of ways we can do that. The sense of belonging that our buildings create, the impact of research through open access and such like. So we've got to hit those things hard and advertise them. And I suppose it's a way of, it's partly thinking how we spend time. I would say talk more to others than among ourselves is important here, or at least increase the time for that to happen. More time looking outwards, not quite as much inwards. Making the most of strengths, well, the good news is the strengths we have are still vital and relevant today and into the future. They're kind of future-proof. Collaboration will always be a good strength. Centrality will help in a competitive environment. Community at times of mental health stress and such like, all of those things very good and valuable. The most valuable will all probably be in our values, our trustedness, if that isn't a new word as such, but to be trusted is a huge value in itself. And I think we should really make more of our values, advertise them more. And I think others out there would really envy our strengths, so we should build our future around them. Communication, a big one here. And I suppose this really is very actively looking to shape perceptions, to help people to think what we would want them to think about the library. And what you're trying to do, I think, is really on 2 levels. You want to really expose strongly the contribution, the distinctive contribution the library makes, but also what it is about us that's distinctive, whether it's our commitment to service, our community role, the fact that we're trusted, the fact we've been there since the 13th century and a very well-established entity. We're different from others in some of those things. We've got to maximise them. Embrace opportunities. Well, where there are problems, there are opportunities. And we kind of talked about some of these, the search for the truth. I think we really got to stand up for that. Research integrity, sustainability, all of those things, areas where we can make a vital contribution and insert ourselves. And I suppose to do that, we have to make a bit more time. So maybe we have to support innovation, kind of forget a bit about perfectionism, discontinue things a bit more to make space for what needs to get attention, and so take the odd gamble. And lastly, I've called it make peace with uncertainty. Well, the only certainty there is that uncertainty will be with us. It's just not a particularly appealing factor, but it's there, it's going to be there. So I think we have to work with it rather than against it. Make the best of it, and keep in mind that actually sometimes it has been helpful. It's hard to describe COVID as helpful, but in the library world, we showed our digital prowess and our social importance as well. So, good can come of ill, and we can also draw on longevity. Having been around 8 centuries, we have survived many a crisis before. The internet did not finish us off despite all the predictions. And I think the other thing we can draw on is others are in the same boat. Everybody's struggling with uncertainty, so let's work with it as much as we can. And I like this quote from Rahm Emanuel, Chief of Staff to Barack Obama: "Never allow a good crisis to go to waste. An opportunity. Do the things you once thought were impossible." So, in conclusion, I guess it's not surprising that in that presentation there's been a real mix of things. Sources of concern, our economic weakness, stakeholder misperceptions, but then confidence towards the future, our longevity, our collaborative instinct, and so on, and our centrality. So, good and bad. And I just think what it comes down to is positioning, if we take it actively, can actually help to shape our destiny and take some control of it, rather than being dictated by events, and it can help to create that better future that we all crave. And it's not so much about extra money, it's more a shift maybe in what we choose to do, how we choose to spend our time or not to spend our time, and how we think, mentality as much as anything. So it's all doable, and I think, as said, everybody has a role to play. Every interaction, every day, bit by bit builds up the perception and the position and positioning of the academic library. And it's a practical thing. It is not mumbo-jumbo in theory. It's mostly practical, and I talked about things we can do there, and I've tried to take the same approach in the book, treat it as a practical thing that we can do. And lastly, just to say, I'm still contactable at my University of Galway email address, and if there's anything I could do for anybody, I'd be so pleased. Just make contact. It'd be lovely to give something back to the wonderful Conul community. Thank you very much.
Thanks to John. That was a great keynote. When we were talking about it and I knew he was going to be the keynote here and I had read the book, I said, now John, don't pull any punches. Lay it out for us. And he certainly did. He didn't hold back. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So who's going to get us started? And I can't quite see. Oh, I see Kate. Yes. Are there mics? Yes, there are mics. So if you could just wait for the mic, say who you are, and I'll let John take the podium.
Hi there. Thanks, John. Kate Kelly from RCSI. That was fantastic. And I think what you've done is you've articulated everything that we've ever felt around being in that position. I'm just wondering, because you talk about communications and what seems to me is we're kind of fragmented in terms of how we're perceived. And if you had to describe what an academic library is today, how would you sum it up?
With great difficulty, Kate, and thank you for the great question and for that brilliant job description, which filled up part of my presentation as well for the College of Surgeons. But I meant to say, really, in my point about communication, that communication needs actually a huge amount of extra effort. And I'm no expert in it, but there are books to be read about it. And so the first thing I forgot to say, and I would say, is that we should all invest heavily in, I think, understanding how to be effective in our communications, because there's no magic bullet for that. But I do think in making some effort to answer the question is that we certainly have to be beware of how diverse our contribution is and how hard just to sum it up. So I'd kind of say two things. One is try and kind of maybe target and segment the audiences a bit and think which messages might resonate best with which. And also, I just think one thing, that article I wrote for the Times Higher this week, they actually challenged me the same thing, can you give an example of concise description of the library? And, if I remember, there was something about promoting scholarship, publishing, and innovation or something like that. I can't remember, promoting scholarship, discovery, and publishing. I think, along those words. So I think, I'm not recommending that to everybody, but I think we have to find shorter, meaningful statements as well, not just kind of trite statements, but the big one I'd say is scholarship. That is our distinctiveness, I think, on campus. So I think we should play mostly on that. So while I can't provide a neat answer, I think it was a great question. I hope I've given you a few pointers, Kate, if that's all right. Thank you. Great.
Yeah, so hi John, I'm Ben Williamson, I'm from UCC. That was a very thought-provoking talk. Wanted to ask your thoughts generally about something, having heard about the problems we face with perceptions from the rest of the institution that are kind of out of date, that the library is a storehouse of books or whatever. Just wanted to ask your thoughts about the different terms that are sometimes used for libraries these days. I've heard of, instead of institutions calling them libraries, they call them their information commons or their learning commons or their learning hub. They seem to go through a lot of different names. Just wondered whether you had any thoughts about the labels that come with that.
Great question. Thanks so much, Ben. I hope I got the right name, but thank you. No, really good question. I've been a sinner myself in that department. When I was at Galway, we made a proposal for the funding for the wonderful new library building that's going up. We call it the Learning Commons. Now, I have to admit, my thinking there is I wasn't wedded to that, but I just thought in order to grab some attention and get the money, we may need to do something distinctive. And I suppose it worked in that particular instance. It might not have done. I'm delighted to see that it's now gone back to being the library. And I think that would be my message, actually, is that I think we should be aware of that dilution and that kind of using of too many kind of odd concepts that even muddy the waters further. We should be confident in the word library and the brand library, but then we just need to be very careful about how we articulate what is different about it and what it does. So I suppose, in a nutshell, as I say, I'm a former sinner, but I'm now a convert, and I just think, actually, the more I think about it, I think that the library brand is what distinguishes us. It's solid. It has been around 800 years. We shouldn't diminish it. And while there can be merit, and sometimes tactical merit, as in that bid for funding, overall, actually, I think we should be confident. The library is a library, and it's got a lot to offer, and we should probably hang our hat on that. I would feel, anyway. That's just my view. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Colin McCauley, Maynooth University. Thanks, John. That was great. Just a question about an area I know was close to your heart, and I'm sure still is. So for those of us involved in things like professional associations and indeed Conul itself, are there particular staff development areas you think we should be focusing on to prepare people for the challenges you outlined?
Yeah, great question, Colin. These questions are all really good. Again, you see, it's tempting, as I was saying in the presentation, one could rattle off data management and open scholarship and such like, but again, it just seems to me maybe it's, I think we've got, once we take those things for granted, we've got to invest in them, but perhaps, this might sound strange, but maybe just investing a bit more in ways of thinking and having a kind of a positive mentality in the first place, and being ambassadors for the library. And because it can't be just the director or the leadership team, it's kind of everybody just kind of thinking where we stand, being proud of what we do, and being good ambassadors, and as I say, generally taking a positive mentality and trying to think, are we using time well? Because, refining a process within the four walls of the library doesn't cut much ice, I suppose, at the top level. It doesn't contribute anything too visibly. And of course, I'm not decrying it, because we have to get good processes yield good services, but maybe just to be thinking, what are we doing? Where do we fit in to the wider picture of the institution and the need of the higher education? What opportunities are out there? So as much as anything, maybe just ways of thinking and areas of emphasis. And I apologize, I feel, Colin, my answer to you and to everybody else is a little bit vague, but I think what we're dealing with is to some extent vague, but I hope it gives a few pointers. Which is that? Oh, I'm delighted to see that. And along with, I have to briefly say, a blue waistcoat my wife bought me, but also a tie, which was given to me the last time Everton won a trophy, which is 1995. I'm surprised this tie has not decomposed in that length of time. It's been very well preserved. It must be library people looking after it.
I think there's some questions on this side. If you get the mic over. Are we a mic over on this side? So this over here.
Hi, thank you, John. That was great. Liz Jolly from UCC Library. I was wondering, and it sort of leads on from Carl's question, is there anything that you came across while you were researching for the book that you wished you'd known earlier on in your career around positioning that would have helped you position the library at Galway more effectively?
Thanks so much, Liz. Another great question. I suppose the short answer is lots, and even like I said in the preface, that I was trying to write the book I would have found valuable when I was starting out. It's a strange thing, and I just alluded to it briefly, but I had to learn this one fairly quickly, but I think it's maybe worth mentioning. I got into the job, my predecessor had been in it for 17 years, but nobody kind of really gave me much guidance. And actually, I didn't realize straight away, maybe I should have done, but I didn't realize straight away, and I think I'm not alone, quite how vital, the positioning work is, and how you must be out there advocating for the library, being the ambassador for it, and also being very much aware of the politics and of how to get things done. And I would love, if I had known that, that would have kind of, I'd say, bought me kind of 18, 24 months, because actually, I don't know if it happens in every institution, but certainly in my case, nobody sat me down and said, right, nobody kind of marked the card. They said, you're in the job, you were deputy to the person who was here for 17 years, we assume you know it all. I don't know how common that is, but I think I wish I'd had maybe more mentoring, perhaps, and other people kind of just guiding me on those two things, the ambassadorial role and the politics. Thank you, Liz.
Any more questions? Oh, there's one right at the back.
Hello. Thank you very much, John. That was a really interesting talk. My name's Christian Headley from the group Genius. You mentioned about the library being in an environment, you used VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. How do you think libraries can make decisions in that sort of environment?
Sure. Great question again, Christian. Well, I think one of the things I'd say is maybe to be at least, as well informed as one can be, to be looking outwards as much as possible, to take into account that big range of things, not just what's happening, as I say, on campus or in higher education or in the world, but actually what are our user communities up to? How are their lives changing? And I think at least if you give yourself the best chance, if you know as much as possible about the many moving parts out there. And I think all you can do is give yourself the best chance, because there's just no way you'll know everything, or that what you do will stay stable for a long time. But I think that would be the key, is to understand the environment and to invest in understanding the environment. And that's kind of why in the first part of the book I spent a long time on that, because I think a lot else hinges from that. So I would say just not only to kind of look at the environment, but maybe to have conversations. And I did say we shouldn't talk too much among ourselves, but we probably should talk at a higher level among ourselves. What are these things in the outside world? But not only to list them, but do they connect to each other? What do they mean for us, but to the institution at large? To be constantly questioning and analysing what's going on out there as best as possible, in addition to collecting that intelligence. So maybe just outward focus and environmental scanning at an advanced level, I'd be like to say, Christian. Great, good stuff.
Okay, we better leave it there. But before we give John a round of applause for that really thought-provoking keynote, John will be signing copies of his book immediately after this session, just outside the exhibition area beside the Perligo stand. Now, John is far too unassuming and far too much of a gentleman to do any kind of a hard sell, so I'm going to do it for him. The book is available from Facet in both print and e-format, and while I am sure your libraries will all purchase a copy, I really would encourage you as colleagues to buy your own, as I've done. You will want to underline it, annotate it, and you will definitely want to come back to it again and again. And hopefully you'll be able to use the receipt that they'll issue you to claim it on your expenses, given how essential this guide is to the work that we all do. So finally, could you please join me in a warm round of applause for John, both for this significant contribution and for his insights today.
Thank you so much.
So we've just one final short presentation from the third of our platinum sponsors, EBSCO.
Good morning. What a great way to start my presentation by following such an insightful discussion from John this morning. I want to encourage you all to think the way that John's encouraged us to think, which is to not think negatively, to think what could go right. And I hope to give you some thoughts about what we're doing to help along that journey. Many of the conversations I have with library leaders center around changes impacting libraries, or what the future of libraries and librarianship might look like. People often recount to me their concerns about AI replacing expertise, student employability, shrinking budgets and increasing costs, staff health and well-being. Not to mention there's an increase in research taking place outside of the library and a decrease in usage of subscribed resources. Now, I can't possibly address all of these topics in a few minutes. I just want to focus on the last comment that I made around users starting their journey outside of the library. To do this, we need to think that there's a drawback to the data that libraries use, counter data, that help determine the value of your digital collections, and in turn, what is or is not justifiable return on your budget expenditure. Let me attempt to draw a parallel. We used to measure the car's value based on its ability to drive a certain distance. The higher the miles per gallon, the greater the car's perceived value. But in an electrified world, miles per gallon goes to 0. But is the car worthless? Well, obviously not. But judging the value of the car based on its miles per gallon simply means we're focusing on the wrong metrics. If users start their research beyond the borders of the digital library, the metrics libraries use to determine their value needs to evolve. It's important to remember that just because there's usage happening in an environment that isn't being captured or measured by the library, that the library is any less worth than it is today. If anything, it's the opposite. And I think we can all make a case as to why that is. So what have we been observing? Well, around the world, those traditional discovery pathways, the online library, they're being bypassed by users. AI chatbots often provide generic answers with no academic sources and no link back to the library. So let me share 2 recent announcements we made. We're trying to help libraries address these problems. Firstly, we announced a partnership to bring EBSCO-host research databases into Perplexity's premium sources. Libraries don't need to do anything to benefit from this, but what are the benefits? Well, in essence, Perplexity connects to EBSCO content, which is now powering the answers within the AI and giving the answers back to the user. Users see citations, they link back to the library, where the user accesses full text. That usage can then be measured and used to help demonstrate the value in a library in a way that it can't be today. This is ultimately about making sure that we show up where users are already searching. And this is just one announcement we expect to make in the future of this type of partnership. The second announcement relates to EBSCO-host AI Exchange. You may have heard about this. This is different. This is about the library powering AI itself. Recognized by libraries and publishers as a neutral and intermediary, we're ideally placed to connect subscribed library content via the EBSCO bridge into AI environments. This allows the AI to build a response to a question directly licensed from the EBSCO content, which is fully citable. The EBSCO-host AI Exchange controls access directly within those AI workflows. With our Perplexity partnership, we're showing up in AI tools. With the EBSCO-host AI Exchange, we're helping your library power the AI experience. Just a shameless plug. If you'd like to hear more about some of the things that we're doing, we'd invite you to our EBSCO Dublin Open Day on the 9th of June. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great remainder of this conference, and I thank you for your time this morning. Thank you.
So we have a short break for the sponsor exhibition and the posters, and also that will be followed by tea and coffee. Thank you.